softer and more human by Watson, in the same way that Royce would be made more human by Hadrian. So by making your characters approachable, by making them people who people would really actually like to meet and talk to and spend time with, I think you're going to have a much longer lasting career, in a sense that people will always come back to you for those characters. So that's something that you should keep in mind. Also, like I said, just having things in that have nothing to do with the story, that are just you kind of like bringing up things that you may have thought about or other people may have brought up to you that you thought were interesting or intriguing, and putting those in the story, into the minds of different characters, makes the story more faceted and more interesting to read. It stops this being a fantasy story about these people doing this quest, and it becomes real people that have interesting ideas that you actually like hearing about. And you'd actually read a story about these characters if they were just sitting around, you know, in a bar or having dinner with them and just listening to their conversations. It would be fascinating just because they're interesting people. And that's sometimes, I don't see that a lot in a lot of other books. Let's see. The other thing I want to touch on here. I guess I have a knack for explaining things in a clear fashion in writing. And I wonder if that has to do something with the fact that I didn't learn it. I kind of lived it. I didn't learn how to write from a class or from anything of that nature. So I really wouldn't have any means of knowing the proper way to go about explaining or teaching. I just basically have interpreted things in my own mind as to how I did it. Because I taught myself how to write. I kind of wrote in a vacuum. I was living in Vermont for like 10 years. And during that time period, I studied everything I could read. And I tried to emulate that in writing. So in that process, I kind of came up with how I would interpret. So in some sense, I feel that what I've done is I haven't like learned by rote. I've learned the actual way things work and why they work. So I have, I think, a greater foundational basis for the ideas that I now preach as being a way of writing. Not that I feel that this is the only way to write. I mean, obviously, many people have many different ways of writing, and there are many different types of readers who love all different kinds of writing. But when people ask me how I write the way I write, I have a better clarity of it because I learned about it from the ground up. It was like, you know, if I was going to work for Amazon, I would have started, you know, in the very bottom, you know, shipping house or even below that. And I would have worked my way up. So I understand the entire working of the building at this point. So I feel speak on it, but also it hasn't been that long ago that I've been doing this. And I noticed that when I was teaching my son to drive, he would do what I thought were silly mistakes. Like he would turn the wheel, but then he wouldn't turn back in order to straighten the car out. He thought that once he turned the wheel, the car would just keep going that direction, and instead of keep turning. And I'm like, why would you think that? And then it occurred to me that it had been so long since I learned how to drive that I've forgotten those things. And I mentioned this once before, that I was learning how to play guitar, and the person teaching me was very skilled at it, and they had forgotten the basics. So because it hasn't been that long, I mean, I have forgotten a number of things that I'm sure that I would remember if I was starting out writing again, but it hasn't been that long since I've learned how to write. And so maybe that's what helps me out. I don't know. Let's see. Do you think people who don't have all the technical skills in writing can still succeed? Is relying on editors too much? Well, I was not, my wife wouldn't like me to say this, but I wasn't, when I first started writing, I was not that great at the writing part of it. I mean, I was really good at making up stories. And I'm talking about when I was in my early 20s. I didn't know a lot of things about the basic skills and crafts of writing. I was much more really good at things like making up characters and stories. But I think that if you are creative and you know how to make up stories and you're good at that, then the craft side can be learned. But yes, you still have to learn it. You can't rely on an editor. Editors aren't there to correct your mistakes. Editors are there to kind of polish what you've already got. They don't make that many changes. They're going to look at your stuff and make sure that you're not embarrassing yourself by making a really stupid, like one of the things I often do, and I insist that this is a autocorrect problem, but I will write perform and it comes out preform. And my wife says I make this mistake constantly. Little things like that they'll find. They'll be able to proof your stuff. Really good editors will be able to help you with some of your sentence structure. But for the most part, editors have a tendency to take a very great backseat to you when you're writing. You're the author. It's your book. They're going to let you write it your way. So you really do have to learn. And it's not that hard. It might seem intimidating at first, but as you get into it, you learn. The more you learn, the more fun it is to learn, and the more fun it is to develop skills in there. And once you do that, it just opens whole new worlds for your ability to write. And you really kind of have to learn that. That's definitely something you have to come up with. And editors are great, and I love editors, but at the same token, you really do have to be able to write in order to get anywhere. They're going to polish it, but the whole sculpture is yours. They're just going to put that final coat of paint on for you. So, no. Oh, look at this. A question came in. Let's take a look. For aspiring author interested in becoming traditional, I got that one. Okay, enjoying the bird posts. Okay, so we're down here to being someone who has done a lot of self-publishing, how much focus on marketing is there when it comes to things like book and series titles or other things? Let's see, again, done a lot of self-publishing. How much focus on marketing is there when it comes on? How much focus is, you mean like it was traditionally published, or how much you would be doing if you're self-publishing? I would think if you've done a lot of self-publishing, you would know how much you do in marketing. If you're talking traditionally publishing, yeah, they will do some work on trying to get you a good cover that they think will work best for the market that you're trying to aim for. And they will also attempt to do design work that will also mimic that. Marketing is going to be completely dependent on the deal that you cut with them. If you have, if they're giving you a 6-figure deal, they're going to give you some marketing. If they give you a 7-figure deal, they're going to give you a lot of marketing because they want their return on investment. If they're giving you a low, less than 6 figures, then you're probably going to get very little marketing on that. They're just going to see, they're throwing spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks. So if you're traditionally published or self-published, doesn't really make a difference. Most of the time, if you're starting out for the first time, you're going to have to do most of your own marketing. You're going to be out there in social media. You're going to be out there in Goodreads. You're going to have to be doing all those things in order to promote yourself. They're not going to do it. They have a lot of other authors they're dealing with. The best promoter for any book is the author themselves. They're the ones who are going to be the most vested in it. They're going to have the most time to deal with it. No one else is going to be as focused as the author. So it doesn't matter which route you go in, you're still going to have to do a lot of that. I saw on Kickstarter that you had previously written 13 other novels which were never published. Why did you decide to abandon these stories? And do you think that any of them were worth touching up and then publishing? Well, I think you answered your own question. The reason I abandoned them is because they were crap. And no, I don't think they're worth touching up. Interestingly enough, I think only the very first few, I think I wrote a trilogy once that was fantasy, but everything pretty much post that were not fantasy books. Most of the books I had written at the time had nothing to do with fantasy. I had written, let's see, science fiction stories. I had written horror stories. I had written detective stories, murder mysteries, coming of age novels. And the last one I wrote was a very serious literary fiction novel, which was the one where I actually reached a point where I really could write. That book was written very well. Wasn't really marketable. I mean, literary fiction is not exactly an easily marketed genre to begin with. And this was very clearly into that vein. But I mean, it was remarkably well written, and I'm still very proud of the writing I did in that. But the reality is it's just not, it wouldn't be very commercially viable. And when I sent it out to agents, they came back and said, basically, yeah, it's a great book. That was fantastic, but you're not going to be able to sell this. And that's kind of when I stopped writing. And I took a a hiatus of about 12 years before I came back and wrote fantasy again for the very first time, pretty much because I wanted to see if I could write the kind of book that I would want to read, and hopefully that would also be a kind of book that my daughter, who was didn't like reading much, she kind of had dyslexia and she really didn't like reading. So I was kind of give her something that would be easy to read, fun to read, and could probably draw her into it. So that's the short answer on that one. Let's see. No, so no, I've never, there was one book, the first book, very first book I wrote, I thought was a pretty good idea. And when I finished Rhaenyra Revelations, I went back and I tried rewriting the first book because I thought it was a cool concept. Turns out it was fatally flawed. And I spent a whole year working on trying to rebuild that and make it work. And it just wasn't coming together in any way. Because once I learned how to write a book, I discovered that I could see the faults in the old books. And I discovered I could see exactly where I did things wrong. And even in trying to rework it, I discovered that the whole concept was one that was never going to work. But that was something I didn't know when I was first writing. And this is kind of a funny thing about when you're an aspiring writer. You come up with this great idea for this book and you think it's wonderful and you write it and you think this is the best thing it's ever going to be, and you're terrified that everyone else is going to steal your idea, or, you know, once you get done with it, you need to have that published because it's great. If you keep writing and you write another book and you write another book and you write another book, eventually you're going to get to a point where you're writing well enough that you could get published by a traditionally published author, or you could self-publish and be very successful. And then at that point, you can look back at that first book and you realize that was a rather trite, stupid idea that you just thought was a good idea. Until you realize the difference, it's often hard to be able to self-judge those kinds of concepts. So oftentimes the idea really isn't that great, but you think it is at the time. I thought this book was fantastic and it had to be written. Turned out not so much. After a while, after you've been writing for some time, you realize that you learn to be more honest with yourself and kind of strip away your pride a little bit and realize, yeah, okay, so it's not that good. So I can tell you right now, those first 13 books, some of them had cool parts, some of them had great ideas in them, but as a whole, no, none of them would be very good if they were written today. What do you do when there's too many ideas for a scene or a story style? Which do you choose, or how do you choose? I'm a little confused here. Let's see. When there's too many ideas for a scene, I then trim out enough of the ideas till the scene works. And the other aspects of that scene, I would then keep and use at a later date, if applicable. If not, I would throw away. There are often times when I'm writing something and I realize that I need to trim it out, and oftentimes I will cut a number of things, and I'll think, well, I'll introduce them later because I'm going to need, because they're necessary for the book. And then as it turns out, they aren't, because oftentimes I overwrite and I will reiterate too often and repeat. So I can take out several references and the concept is still there. Or in other instances, I won't tell you something because I cut it out, but it turns out I gave you enough hints that you can put it together yourself. So oftentimes, if a scene is too complicated, you can probably hack out most of that stuff, simplify it, and it's probably not going to hurt the scene. It'll probably make the scene better. Another good example of that is one of the things I discovered many years ago was that when you write, people write wordy. You can usually always take out like 2 or 3 words almost out of every sentence, and it still is grammatically correct and still makes perfectly good sense. In fact, it gets stronger and it gets more powerful as you do that. Same thing is true with plots. You strip away ideas that are unnecessary, and for the most part, the book will get better, not worse. So making things overly complex is not a really good way of doing it. So I would just dump those extra ideas, and if they're absolutely necessary to complete the story, then put them in another spot where there's a lull that you can use those for more effect. Let's see. What do you do? Okay, so that one. Or how do you choose? I just choose the ones that make the scene the best. So to finish that idea. To add to your earlier question about editors. So editors will not point out bad prose or etc. only technical issues. We'll stop you right there. It depends on what editor you have. All editors are very different. And finding a good editor that matches you as a writer is extremely important. There are some editors who will only check your technicality. They will almost proofread. There are other people who will go so far as to attempt to ghostwrite you. They will rewrite your sentences. Now, as an author, you probably don't want that to happen. But like I said, if you get a really good author or a really good editor, they're going to probably read your sentence and tell you that, you know, if you flip the front clause to the back, the sentence will be a little better. Or maybe this word isn't the most accurate word that you want to use. Maybe how about this one? This one might be a more accurate word that we're talking about. Or do you know that this word doesn't mean what you think it means? They will do things of that nature if they're an exceptionally good editor. Most often, they will simply go through and look for grammatical errors. They will often go through and simply look for where you misspelled the name of your own character that you invented. They look for consistency. They look for the fact that you're using the style guide right, and different houses of publishing will use different style guides. Like how often, like His Majesty, is that H and M capitalized? Different things of that nature. Do you use the Oxford comma, if or not, depending on what style guide you're using? These are things that they all keep track of. Sometimes if you have a really good one, they'll actually even fact check for you. They'll say that, you know, you misspelled this person's name, or this did not happen on that date. Those are the really good ones. But it's a hit and miss what you're going to get. So it's best to give them the best possible. So even if you have a bad editor, you're still going to have a decent book. Rest of that question. Will they help with story structure at all? Okay, now this brings us into the understanding of what editors are. There are multiple kinds of editors, as well as being multiple editors. So there is what's known as a story structural editor, and that is usually the type of person you're going to find at a major publisher. These are people who will actually look at your story and suggest, you know what, you probably should make this change because this part here, the story's dragging, or this doesn't make a lot of sense, or this is slow here, so on and so forth. They will make suggestions to you. They're just suggestions usually. I mean, I've never, it's difficult for me to say because my experience with publishers or with editors is very different from other people I've talked to. Some people, the editor will do extensive changes. Other people, editors will demand that they make these changes. No one has ever done that to me. With everything I've ever put in, editorial changes as far as structure is concerned are very minimal. But I don't know if that's because what I have doesn't require a lot of structural editing, or perhaps, I don't know, maybe they're scared of me. I don't know. But that's not something I usually have to deal with. I did have a number of suggestions for Rhaenyra, but because that book had already sold 70,000 copies and I had heard back from a number of readers, both in reviews left on Amazon and Goodreads and sent to me in emails, I knew what people liked and what people didn't like. So I could make very intelligent decisions in saying, you were right about this, you were wrong about this. And that's really what taught me the quality of editors. And some editors are good, some editors are bad. Most of the part is that you as an author know what you're doing more than they do, because you have been, if you're anywhere near an experienced writer, you've probably been at this for a decade or more, and all that's you've been doing a lot of that. You've been working on it very hard, and most of the editors, they're quite young for the most part. The ones you'll find in some of the New York houses, they're not, you know, white-haired old men or women who are working at this company for 30 years. They're people who are, you know, in their late 20s, early 30s, some of them right out of high school or right out of college, who are, have an English major and they're working. So you don't want to trust them too much, but they do know the industry and they know what pitfalls you might run into. And a lot of these are things that you're going to have to make a decision on yourself because you're the author. You have the final say on it. Unless, of course, your contract says something different, which I've never signed a contract like that. And I would not suggest anyone else does that. But yeah, as the author, you have final say on the book. So in that case, you're going to be the final authority. They will give you input. And I've actually known some authors, I won't name names, who actually request that their editor, look, I was rushed during this. I don't think it's my best work. I want you to put in extra effort and push back on me. And then they'll do that. So you can encourage them to do that if that's something you feel they need. So experiences are very different across the board. All I can say is what my experiences were. Structural editing is one type of editing they do that's usually done at the very beginning. They give you feedback of this worked, this didn't, maybe you should think about changing this, and so on and so forth. I get very little of that. Other people get more. Then there's also your line editors, which is what I was describing earlier, people who will look at your sentence and say, this can be a tighter sentence. You can use a different word here. You can flip the clause, things of that nature. Those would be line editors. You don't get a lot of that. I've had it a few times, but not too often will I get that level of scrutiny. I really wish I could, because those are the good ones that I really like. Then you have what's known as your drawing a blank on the name of what they call the editor, but it's essentially more of a proofing and consistency, where they're looking for style guides, and they're looking that all your stuff is you using the same names and things of that nature, or same spelling of names and that sort of thing. And that's a different type of editing. And then there's proofreaders who just go through looking for mistakes. So there are many different types of editors that will look at your book if you're going through traditional publishing. And if you're going self-publishing, you should do the exact same thing. You get the exact same kind of feedback with the exact same type of editors if you want to do a really good job of it, which of course you do. Let's see. Will they help with structure? Yes, of course, some do. Would they point out places in your story that you need to add more sections that you need to change or cut? Sometimes they do. It has not been too much my experience, but on occasion that does happen on occasion. I had heard something about this before, but not from any reliable source yet. Like I said, it's really hard to explain that, because everyone's going to have a different experience. Like I said, I've heard some people have nightmares where their editors have totally indicated they had to rewrite whole sections and redo the book several times, and it's still not right. And other people will get that kind of light pass editing. If you're self-publishing, that's another thing. You have to find a good editor that's going to match your style, because each writer is going to be looking for something. Now, some people want just a light pass, looking for mistakes. Other people are really, insecure about, did I get this right? What do you think? Because they generally don't have other people going over it. Like with me, Robin is my alpha reader. She's also would be my structural editor. She will go through and she'll find all those problems for me initially. And then I run it through a beta where I have 25 to 50 people who give me back their input. And so after that process, I'm not so looking for structural editing, because I pretty much have a good idea of where the good parts, where the slow parts, what things need to be changed. And I've already done all those. So when it goes to, like say a traditional publisher, because I put it through the same process regardless. When it gets to them, it's going to be now in a really good shape. Or if I'm going in, I just need at that point, people look for errors. But when I'm looking for a final editor, a professional editor that I'm paying for, what I'm looking for is someone who will actually look at each sentence and say to themselves, is this the best sentence? Are these the best words there? But not someone who's going to rewrite what I'm doing. They will make suggestions, they will make comments, but that's it. And they'll keep those to a light degree, because the point they're getting at, I've really already done all the heavy lifting through other venues. So they're just there to give me that final good polishing that I need. And for me, that's the level that I need. Other people need it even lighter. Other people need a much heavier touch. So again, I know that's not a definitive answer for you, but it's really, I hate to say it's going to be this way, and then you get involved in it and discover that wasn't right at all. That was completely wrong. So I can only say what I can do, but I do talk to other writers, and I got into the idea that it's a little different depending on who you're with. Jumping to chat here. Did I get all the questions? Yes. All right, we're getting up past 9, so we should probably be wrapping this up. So if you have any last minute questions, let me know, and I'll try to make them fairly quick answers. Jumping on here, do you think people who don't have any technical skills, we already did that one. Did you end up taking any of cool parts or ideas from those books and reusing them in later stories? No, not really. I haven't ever picked up much from those books. Like I said, it was amazing how bad they were when I learned how to do it. Copy editor. Thank you. That was the other one. There was line editor and copy. So structural, line, and copy. Thank you. Good enough answer. Okay. So we're getting kind of late here. Unless anyone had anything last minute they wanted to ask, I think I'll be wrapping it up. So here's your last minute chance. I'll give you a couple seconds to either write me a question or say goodnight. Thanks for doing this and being so awesome. Oh, I am awesome, aren't I? And answering all my questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. See you in Everlyn. Yes, you're coming out. Good. Have a good night. And you too, everyone out there. I hate to keep looking over at the text, but it's the only way I can keep track of things. So just going to make sure that everything is covered. Looks like it is. Wonderful. And thank you all for coming and sitting through this very long talk about books. And thank you again for all of you who backed the Kickstarter. And hopefully you'll have Age of Legend very soon. And hopefully I'll have also the other books well along the way so you don't have to wait too long. Okay? So good night to you all. And thank you so much for showing up and putting up with me. And good night.